does. So there are two ways in which you can think of competition. First, in static conditions. It means nothing changes, nothing really important changes. The products are given. Technological means of producing things are given. And there is a very narrow range of possible variations in conditions. In the price taker model, there are no variations at all. Everything is given in advance. You'll see that in the price searcher model, there are some variations. Conditions could be changed to some degree, but not very much. So then static conditions, everything is given, and firms only compete by doing something with their prices and quantities within a given framework, within a given environment. So price taker and price searcher are the two theoretical models that can be used to make sense of this type of condition. And the second view is this dynamic view of competition once we allow change to happen. Changes of all kinds. Be changes in technology, technological innovations that can by and large forbidden here now could be allowed. Organizational innovations. So that means that the changes in the internal structure and the management of a firm would happen. For example, in static conditions, you have a firm just like a black box. A firm is something that is producing stuff. You enter the inputs, labor, capital, raw materials, and it mixes them up and spits out a product. So firm is just a mechanism that produces, sometimes called a black box. Black box. You don't think about the internal structure of the firm or different types of the firms and how differences in internal organization of a firm affect productivity. That's all beyond the reach of your analysis. Here, the organizational innovations and changes are taken into account, and they're the source of competitiveness of different firms. So one example of this would be corporate versus proprietary types of the firm, public versus private firms. So there is a reason why corporations produce 95% of economic value in this country, because they have some organizational advantages. We'll talk about that later, but this is what I have in mind by organizational innovation. You can change the way how a firm is run, how this productive unit is run, and that will affect the productivity of your productive unit. So these are some of the considerations or some of the aspects of the dynamic efficiency of the markets. When things change, what can change, and how do these changes affect productivity? This is the story for next class on Monday. We will be reading an article that talks about both of these aspects, and then some. The article by Joseph Schumpeter. For now, today we're going to follow up on our initial discussion of a price taker model last time to understand a slightly different and slightly less crazy and less unrealistic model of static competition, which is called the price searcher model. So I'll start first with listing. The price searcher model is a variation on a theme, as they say. It's a modification of a price taker model. Relatively limited modification. That's the reason why I'm going to start by listing the initial conditions or the initial assumptions of the price taker model, and then we will look at how the price searcher model changes these conditions and which conditions are changed, which conditions are retained. I'll write it down very briefly for you. These 6 or 7 conditions. You remember all of them. Large number of firms. Price taking mechanism. Firms, price takers, which means that they cannot influence prices in any shape or form. They have to take prices as given and to use them in their calculations profit and revenue. Perfect information. Perfect information. It doesn't mean absolute rationality and absolute unlimited knowledge about everything. It means only that the market participants are well informed. That means that the buyers know about the existence of sellers and about the characteristics of products and vice versa. They're well connected. There are no informational barriers to trade and exchange. So that's the meaning of this precondition of perfect information. What else? There are no barriers to entry. Financial, legal, or otherwise. Entry into the business is free. If it's not, then the market structure is not competitive. No differentiation. This is, you will remember, as homogeneous product. Everybody is producing and selling the exact same thing. No differentiation of products. Let's say then no competition by higher quality, by a better product. If you cannot differentiate your product from other people's products, then you cannot compete against them in a way of offering a slightly more appealing version of the same thing. No advertising. This condition might be redundant, as you remember, because if you assume that information is perfect, that implicitly contains the idea of no advertising, because the main purpose of advertising is to make your product known, to overcome the information barrier between buyers and sellers. And if this barrier is overcome by definition, then there is no need to prohibit advertising. It is already assumed that there wouldn't be a need for advertising. But sometimes, in order to contrast the price taker with the price searcher model, we list this no advertising precondition separately. Finally, private property. Private property in the means of production. I'm using now the ancient means of production. Simply refers to everything that is used in the production process, factors of production. It is more modern. Factories, raw material, everything but human labor. Everything is privately owned. And now we'll take a look at this and see which assumptions are now relaxed in a price searcher model. So probably the first thing that would pop up in your mind, actually, if it's not a price taker model, it's a price searcher, that you have to search for your price, the condition number 2 is eliminated. A firm within this model doesn't take the price of its product as a given variable anymore. It has to find out what is an optimal price for it. Let us see which assumptions are retained. Not very many of them. Essentially only two. Only two assumptions from the price taker model are retained. Number 7, everything is privately owned still. Number 4, no financial or legal barriers to entry.
Isn't the perfect information and no advertising the same as price taker model as well?
No, I'm talking about the assumptions that are retained. They're the same. Now, number 4 and number 7 are retained.
They're the same.
The private property, they're the same in both models.
Okay.
This one is eliminated. The horizontal line means something is eliminated. These two sides mean that something is retained. Number 4 and number 7 remain the assumptions of the model in the price searcher. No differentiation, no advertising, and perfect information, as well as large number of firms are all eliminated. Only these two are retained. And we'll see in a moment what are the consequences of this, why is this so, and what are the consequences of this. Remember, for these two models, we will analyze them by trying to understand the position of the demand curve that an individual firm is facing in this market. So, as you remember, in a price taker model, you had the horizontal demand curve. This is the equilibrium price, and this price corresponds to marginal revenue, corresponds to average revenue. Remember that. You sell the first unit, your additional revenue from selling the first unit is price times 1. $10 times 1 is $10. The second unit, you're selling one more unit, the price is the same. Third unit, you're selling the third unit, price the same. So marginal revenue is always equal to price. And average revenue is also equal to price because you get the average revenue by, let's say, by calculating total revenue, which is the total number of units times price per unit. So in this particular case, let's price $10 per unit, 9 units. That would be 90 units divided by $90 divided by 9 units equals 10, the price. So average revenue corresponds to marginal revenue, corresponds to price. So this is very important because this will not be the same in the price searcher model. We will see in a moment why. So there is no large number of firms anymore. Now, when we discussed this, as I called it, structuralist view of competition, the view, in other words, of competition that identifies or defines the competitiveness of a given market with the number of sellers in that market. So we've seen that on the one end, on the one extreme, we have a perfect competition, perfectly competitive market with a huge number of firms. In some conceptualizations, even an infinite number of firms. On the other end, what would be the other extreme? Monopoly. Just one firm. What is the demand curve of a monopolistic firm? What does it look like? This is a perfectly competitive firm. Yeah, it's vertical. I mean, in theory, it should be like this, actually, but it's very rarely really vertical, but pretty much like that. This is monopoly. You can charge very high prices with little fear that consumers will switch to substitutes. In between here is something called oligopoly. So oligopolistic market structure, which is characterized by the presence of a relatively few firms, so 3, 5, 10, so on. So it's not a monopoly, but it's not like a perfectly competitive market with thousands of sellers either. And what the demand curve that a firm within this model oligopolistic market structure faces, that's our price searcher model. Price searcher is typically oligopolistic or trending towards perfect competition, but very rarely a pure perfect competitive market with a huge number of firms. It could be like 30, 40, 50 firms and so on. And the demand curve that the firm within this model faces is our well-known classical standard downward sloping demand curve. Price searcher demand curve. Higher the price, lower the quantity that you can sell. Lower the price, you're going to sell more. You had to make a trade-off between, on the one hand, increasing your price and charging more per unit. That's the benefit of higher price. And the downside of higher price is that you're going to sell less units. So you have to find your sweet spot, actually, where you maximize your total revenue by selecting a particular combination, by selecting your place along the demand curve here. Combination of price that you want to charge and quantity that you can sell at this price. And as you can see now that this model has something in common with the monopoly, because the firm also has the ability to influence its own price. That's the difference. In a price taker model, the only way how a price taker firm can compete against its rivals is by increasing or decreasing quantity it produces and sells. Remember that when this equilibrium price goes up, you increase your production. If equilibrium price goes down, you decrease your production. That's the only way how you serve consumers, by adjusting your level of production to the market conditions of demand, as expressed in price. Here, that's not enough. You have to decide about the quantity that you're going to produce, but you also have to decide about the optimal price that you're going to charge. Which means that you have certain ability, certain, as it is called sometimes, market power. Market power is the ability of an individual firm in a market to charge its price independently from what its competitors do. There's a certain level of discretionary power to change its prices. So this price searcher firm has the ability which reminds one of the monopolist's ability to choose his own prices. So this particular resemblance prompted a person who invented this model. Actually, this was the first economic model that was invented by a woman, Professor Joan Robinson of Cambridge University in the 1930s. She called it monopolistic competition. It's a kind of oxymoronic, self-contradictory, seemingly phrase. Price searcher was initially called in older textbooks, older than 20, 30 years, you will always find monopolistic competition for this. So it's competitive, it's a system of competition. There is more than one firm, and there is a competitive pressure. But on the other hand, there is an element of monopolistic behavior here, this fiddling with prices and your ability to influence your prices. So now, in the meantime, it was well understood that ability to change your prices is not necessarily anti-competitive. So that's the reason why economists nowadays prefer this designation of price searcher to avoid any negative value judgment about the model, which it is perfectly consistent with an efficient competitive system. So this monopolistic adjective here is kind of unnecessary. They just want to point out that the firm within this type of market has to decide about both its price and quantity that it will charge. So let's take just a very simple, crude example here, what I mean by price searching. Let's say that this is the existing price for 8 units. And now let's say that you want to reduce your production to 7 units. What is the maximum? What is the minimum price that you need to charge on the market that consumers should be ready to pay to you per unit in order for this reduction in production to make sense, to be profitable? More than 5.
Wait, was your question what would the market be willing to pay, or what does the firm need to ask?
What they would need to pay. What this firm needs to receive from the consumer. So what is the minimum price per unit that they need to receive in order for this move to make sense economically? What do you think? A round number. You don't have to use the decimal numbers to calculate it. There's the 6. What's that 6? So why 6?
You decrease your quantity, so you got to raise your price.
Yeah. So what you're after is maximizing total revenue. Total revenue here is 40. So if you want to experiment with your prices and quantities, and you want to reduce quantity to 7, the minimum price that you need per unit in order to exceed $40. So total revenue is 6. 6 times 7. 42. So $6 should be the minimum. The minimum price that you charge. So see, that's the business that the price searcher firm is in. To estimate, while deciding about the volume of your production, you have to gauge or to trade off, on the one hand, the gains. Okay, so this is the trade-off. That you don't have to make in a price taker model. You don't have any power over prices. You can forget about price. Here it's much more complicated. You have to trade off, on the one hand, benefits of higher revenue on account of higher per unit price. So if you reduce your quantity, you will charge higher price, but whether this increased price or higher revenue that you acquire by selling at a higher per unit price will be greater than the loss of volume. Loss of volume of sales, the number of units that you sell. Benefits of higher price per unit versus loss of volume because of higher price per unit. When price is higher, people will buy less. So now, what is the trick here? It seems easy. You just draw the line and you calculate and then you decide how much to produce. What do you think? Why is this so tricky? Why not everybody can do the business, can be an entrepreneur? What can you tell me about this demand curve?
Based on consumer preferences.
It's based on consumer preferences. Past consumer preferences, present consumer preferences, or future consumer preferences. If you produce something that you're going to sell in the future.
Past. Or
Past?
maybe present one.
You're going to be selling in 3 months. What are you interested in?
Oh, you want the future ones, but you don't.
Yeah, you want future ones. But you don't know the future ones because you don't know them. You cannot read the minds of people. Maybe even people don't know whether they're going to buy. So you have to guess about this. So Steve Jobs said that there is no demand. Actually, you have first to produce something to figure out whether people want it or not. There is no demand curve being drawn out there, waiting for you to discover it and say, aha, this is demand curve, now I'm going to produce and I'm going to sell.
Aren't they trying to like get around that limitation by like having stuff where you like pre-order or like I'm trying to think with other people who like certain companies that want to start up they ask people, are you?
Oh yes, they, of course. What do you think? Why firms spend billions and billions of dollars every year in market research to figure out what people believe, what people would like to buy? To overcome the problem to some degree, to get more information about what is likely to fly in the market. But that's always imperfect. If it were perfect, we wouldn't need entrepreneurs. Actually, we could use the socially central planning actually produce. We wouldn't need to waste so much resources in competition if we knew information, if we knew with certainty the information about what consumers want in the future. Then competition would have been an extremely inefficient way of producing necessary stuff. Why would we need 10 firms competing in producing cars? If we know what exact car needs to be produced and what people want, we could then assign to one person or one firm to produce cars and shift the 9 remaining ones, labor, capital, raw materials, to producing something else for society. See, if we knew the information with any level of precision about what people really want, competition would have been very wasteful way of organizing economic life. We need competition exactly because we don't need it. We don't have this information. We want the competition to discover for us, finally, what are the consumer preferences. So one economist that I highly recommend, you read August von Hayek, has an article, actually, I highly recommend it. You can download it for free. Competition is a discovery procedure. That article arguing that the main aspect, the key aspect of competitive process is to discover the knowledge that we don't know what we need about what people really want on the one hand, and what is the best way and most economical, most efficient way of producing what people want. We have no other way available to us to discover these things. Socialists believed many decades ago that you can do this through central planning, and this didn't work out very well. So we cannot go deeper now into this. This is a topic for a kind of advanced seminar in economic theory, but I just wanted to illustrate for you what is the meaning of this demand curve not being known well in advance. So that's the reason why we need as many entrepreneurs, talented entrepreneurs, to experiment, to guess, and to try to find the most efficient way of satisfying the needs of consumers. Okay, any questions? Smart. Okay, back to this one. I'm going to do something silly and simple demonstration of what's going on with the price searcher model here to illustrate further for you how the decision-making process unfolds in a price searcher firm. We can use a very simple, so this is the demand curve that an individual firm is facing. It pairs together the prices and quantities that will be demanded at any given price. So we know that we can, the way how demand curves are drawn is actually that we have first to assume that we know the demand schedules. So what are demand schedules? Tabulary overviews of how many units will be sold and both at any given price. So let's start with $10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then let us assume that the distribution of quantities that will be sold at any one of these given prices is equally simple. So 1 unit with $10, 2 units with $9, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is demand schedule, the inverse relationship between, like a regular run-of-the-mill demand curve, regular run-of-the-mill demand schedule. Lower the price, higher the quantity demanded. And now let's throw in 2 additional things. Total revenue and marginal revenue. So one thing that we can say about marginal revenue is the revenue, that's a revenue that you derive from selling one additional unit. You'll see that in the market, in general, marginal revenue will tend to be diminishing with every subsequent unit, with every subsequent lower price, the marginal revenue will tend to go down gradually. That's one important thing to bear in mind. The second important thing is that what you want to maximize in this particular case is the total revenue. This analysis here. You want to find a combination of price and quantity that maximizes total revenue. So let's assume that this is the demand schedule. If you charge $10, you can sell one unit. Only one person will buy. If you charge slightly lower, $9, 2 units will be sold, irrespective whether one person buys or 2 persons. If you charge 8, you sell 3, and so on down the line. So can we calculate the total revenue then for every particular combination? So here is 10, 18, 24, 8 times 3, 7 times 4 is 28, 6 times 5 is 30, again 30, now 28, 24, 18, 10. Can somebody now calculate the marginal revenue for every single transaction here? So what's the marginal revenue from selling the first unit? Marginal revenue is the difference between total revenue before and after the sale. So what is the total revenue before the sale? 0. You haven't sold any, you don't have revenue. What is the total revenue when you sell the first unit? It's 10. So this is the same thing as in the price taken model, first unit, but then something interesting happens. What is the marginal revenue for second unit? 8. 18 minus 10. So it's going down. What is the next? 24 minus 18, 6. 4 for the fourth unit. Or for the fourth unit, or for the price $7. The increment in revenue is from 24 to 28. 4. Here is 2. Then 0. Then minus 2. You actually increase production, but you lose revenue. So you can already see that this is not a good idea. Probably that this is not going to be your equilibrium combination of prices and quantities. If you're losing revenue by increasing production, that's not good. So then minus 4, 28 minus 24, minus 6, and minus 8 eventually. So where is total revenue maximized? Total revenue is maximized at 2 points here. So then the equilibrium quantity that this firm needs to produce and to sell in the market could be either 5 or 6 units. Which one is it? There couldn't be more than one equilibrium. What can you tell by looking at the table? Should it be 5 or 6, and why?
Should be 5 because you're still receiving a marginal revenue.
It should be 5 because?
So that you're still receiving a marginal revenue.
You're receiving no marginal revenue. Why would you be doing something that doesn't give you any?
No. So that price 6.
It should be 5. Quantity 5 or price 5?
Quantity 5.
Quantity 5 is the equilibrium quantity. Okay, and the price, equilibrium price at which you sell, you sought and found your price at $6. Why is that so? Can you just briefly explain?
Because your marginal revenue is positive.
Marginal revenue is positive. You're gaining something by increasing your production from 4 units to 5, so that's good. Why not going to 6? You don't gain anything. You lose something. You have to invest and to waste time and to produce, and you don't gain anything. So that's a bad idea. That's wasteful. So then the equilibrium combination here is 5 units sold at $6. Now you can, one of the assumptions or the key assumption of this analysis is that we ignore marginal cost. We assume that this is like a cost-free activity. Let's say like you're bottling the water on a creek. That's essentially very low cost or zero cost activity. If you introduce marginal cost, then it's going to get a little more complicated. And marginal cost, you will remember, this is the marginal cost curve. For the reasons that I will not go into right now, marginal revenue is declining as you increase the quantity produced. Marginal cost is going up. Marginal cost is increasing, so remember that. In most real-world settings, marginal cost is increasing. If you really insist, I can try and very briefly explain why, but we will be discussing the marginal cost, concept of marginal cost and marginal productivity in a week or two, and then you will fully realize why is this. So this is essentially, as I told you in the price taker model, it's an individual firm's supply curve. It pairs together the quantities that they can produce and the prices at which they will produce. And the relationship is the same. Higher the quantity produced, higher the cost or price. Higher price is needed to justify producing this additional unit. So then, if you introduce the marginal cost, then the principle of equilibration here, or principle of your decision to maximize profit, is to equalize marginal revenue and marginal cost. That's the same as in this model here. This equilibrium point is marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So you essentially keep increasing production until further decreases in marginal revenue approximately equal increases in marginal cost. So marginal revenue starts from the highest point, marginal cost from the lowest point. As you increase production, they converge gradually, and you keep doing it, you keep producing until they meet. That's the principle. So that's, in a certain sense, similar to this market and to any other market. It's the principle of equalizing marginal revenue with marginal cost. Notice one difference between this price searcher situation and this here. Can you notice any differences? In the triangle price, marginal revenue, marginal cost. So equalization of marginal revenue and marginal cost is the same, but there is one difference. Any ideas? Compare marginal revenue and price. Here they are equal. $10. Are they equal here? No. Price is greater than marginal revenue in price searcher model. Price that you charge on the market will be greater than your marginal revenue, how much you gain. So this is graphically shown sometimes like this. They start both the same demand curve. Demand curve contains the array of prices that you will charge and receive on the market, and marginal revenue curve is like this. So marginal revenue is always lower. For any given quantity, marginal revenue is always lower than the price. Why is that the case? This is the final point. Any ideas? Why? Why price searcher firms have the ability to charge more than the minimum that is necessary for them to cover their cost? Sometimes people who don't understand economics very well would say that they can mark up pricing. They can go above the competitive market prices and charge more. Why price searcher firms can get away with charging more? That's a very subtle point. It has to do with this list that I just erased. Just now realized that it would come in handy if we had it here. The answer is that the price searcher firm has to do something more. Price taker firm doesn't have the costs of advertising. Number two, differentiations. What are the costs of differentiation? It's market research. What consumers would want? Everybody's selling a black car and now you want to sell a green car. You have to inquire whether that's a profitable proposition or not. So that costs money. Quality. Competition with quality is an expensive thing. So higher price is usually understood as a compensation for other kinds of investment and costs that the price searcher firms have to undergo that the price taker firms do not have. Compensation for advertising and competition with quality or differentiation. So essentially, you are never paying the exact same product. That's the idea. If you're paying a higher price, that means that you're paying either some additional services that are not available in a price taker model, or you're paying slightly better product, or you're paying the costs of the firm to discover what would be a superior or a better product. So here, we can say with certainty one thing, that the products in a price searcher markets are always a little bit more expensive than they would have been had the market been perfectly competitive. That's one downside. But this shouldn't be understood as a claim that price searcher markets are exploitative in any shape or form of consumers, but rather it should be understood as to mean that the price searcher firms are producing superior quality products that have some costs and that have to be paid through slightly higher prices than in a perfectly competitive market. So that's the meaning of this seemingly fishy divergence of marginal revenues and prices and marginal revenue curves and demand curves. Okay, so that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about this model. We'll skip over one particular aspect of this model because it's really already slightly tedious to deal with this model and much more fun. There will be more fun, I promise you, on Monday with Schumpeter. We will relax completely all these static assumptions and we'll say what happens in reality. How competition, what are the most potent, the most powerful forces of competition in the real world? You will see that Schumpeter starts by actually not ridiculing, but criticizing these two models at the very beginning. Okay, any final questions? No. Okay, once more, there will be no homework for weekends, so don't send me emails asking when I will post the quiz.